Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's education session. We are just about ready to get going. First off, I'm just going to do a few quick housekeeping items with you. So first off, you'll notice that your audio is on mute, but of course you will still have questions. So as those questions come to mind, please just put those into the questions area. You'll see that on the right-hand side. And what we'll do is towards the end of the session, we will go through a full Q&A portion of the presentation, and I'll facilitate those questions so our presenters can answer. With that said, let us roll straight into the session. And Chuck, I'm going to throw things over to you to kick us off.
Okay, I will do that. Welcome everybody to the session. And we've got Graham Clark presenting this afternoon. So I thought I'd give a brief introduction. He doesn't need much of an introduction because most of you would have seen him before. Either you've been trained anytime recently if you're a newer inspector, because Graham's part of our technical training team, but more likely he's been a guest presenter at the Pillar to Post conference for a few years, and he's also a presenter at the ASHI conference every year. And he's a hot ticket at those events. The other thing I wanted to just jump in and point out, particularly because this is all about roofing, is that in addition to being a home inspector for so many years, Graham also ran a roofing consulting company for a period of time at the same time that he was an inspector. And a funny thing is, just before we logged in, I said I was going to remind everybody or let people know, and he said, oh my goodness, I actually forgot that I did that. So I'm guessing he must have blocked it out, but he actually was a professional roofing consultant as part of his tenure as a home inspector. So I think I'll leave it at that and just pass it right on to Graham, and we'll get into the action. So welcome.
Well, thanks, Chuck. And that actually reminds me of something else that I forgot, which was before I did that, I also worked for a roofing consulting company as a summer job in 1988, doing thermal imaging of commercial flat roofs. So I don't know many people who have been using thermal imaging longer than I have. And just to give you an idea of what the dark ages of thermal imaging looked like, the pictures were not digital. They were on black and white Polaroid film. And that clicking sound you might hear out of your FLIR camera as it's calibrating, the way that we calibrated thermal imaging cameras at that time was to pour liquid nitrogen into them just to establish the baseline temperature. So anyway, that I guess is the reason for the gray in the beard. Anyway, thanks Kimberly, thanks Chuck, and so we'll get right into it, to my second favorite subject, my first favorite being me, so thank you. My second favorite being roofing. So we're going to talk about inspecting asphalt shingle installations with respect to layup, with respect to the stagger. And I'm going to start off talking a little bit about some of the basics of the installation, but I don't want to get into that too deeply, because I really want my focus to be on things that I think are within the context of a home inspection. It is worthwhile understanding how shingles are to be nailed in place, for example. But generally speaking, if you can see where the nails are placed, something is wrong anyway. Nails are not supposed to be visible, and so the nuances of where exactly those nails are supposed to be are a little bit outside the scope of a home inspection. But I'm going to talk about that just a little bit anyway. So this is what we're going to go through this afternoon. We're going to talk a bit about basic installation of asphalt shingles. And one of the things that we certainly can inspect, one of the most visual things about especially 3-tab shingles are how the shingles are staggered, how they're laid up on the roof. And one of the reasons why we're talking about this today is that not so much 3-tab shingles, but over the last 10, 20 years, there's been a very strong shift away from 3-tab shingles towards single-tab shingles, or laminated shingles, architectural style asphalt shingles. And shingle staggering is a little more subtle to detect in these things, and it's a lot more likely to be wrong. So we're going to talk about the proper ways of doing it, both with respect to 3-tab shingles and laminated shingles. We're going to talk about some of the typical defects, how you might recognize those defects, and what the implications are. And they range from being cosmetic concerns to actually being performance-related concerns, and talk a little bit about how one might report some of these things, keeping in mind all of the elements of writing a proper comment. So here we have a fairly typical slide of asphalt shingle installation. Here we're looking at 3-tab asphalt shingles. And I'm going to talk a bit about some of the stuff on the underneath before we get to how the shingles themselves are actually put on. On the roof deck, in this case, we have possibly plywood or OSB type decking. You can see that gray area there identified as eave protection or eaves protection. And that's a water-resistant barrier. The good stuff is going to be a peel and stick, modified bitumen membrane. Sometimes it's acceptable just to use double layers of roofing felts and stick them together with some roofing asphalt. And that's typically required under certain circumstances. I don't want to get too much into code types of things, but if the roof is really, really steep, you don't need that. If there's no heated space underneath it, you don't need that. But eaves protection is the extra protection that we do need down at the very bottom of the roof, in some cases to protect against ice damming, and in other cases to protect against wind-driven rains, hurricane type of rains getting underneath the shingles at the very bottom edge of the roof. So we've got that sheet that's going up something like 3 feet to 39 inches, either basically 1 yard or 1 meter, depending on the product being used. Up above that, the roof deck itself may have some, sorry about that, just getting my marker going here. There we are. And so in the upper part up here, we may have our underlayment. Traditionally, that's going to be a roofing felt, although because roofing felt tends to be kind of slippery, a lot of modern installations use a synthetic underlayment, Rhino roof, things like that. There's different brand names of it, but it's very thin polyethylene kind of woven sheet, but it is a lot easier for roofers to walk on it. It's a non-slip surface. And the underlayment, I've always really thought the primary benefits to the underlayment was for roofing companies to be able to specify an additional product that they could then sell to roofers. Because all of the reasons that I've really heard for putting underlayment on don't really hold a whole lot of water, much like roofing felt itself does not hold a lot of water. Eventually water will just leak through. Is it an extra water barrier? Well, it doesn't really stop water from getting through, so there you go. It might slow it down a little bit. At any rate, I don't want to talk about that too much because, again, we can't see it when we're doing a home inspection, so we're rarely going to be able to comment on it, unless there's a whole bunch of shingles missing, in which case we've got a different problem. All right, down at the very bottom of the roof here, we can see a starter strip and a bunch of different ways we can put down a starter strip. Originally, starter strips would be just a 3-tab shingle like you see right here, but instead of the tabs pointed down, we take the tabs and we point them going up the roof like that. The real proper way of doing it is as shown on the picture right here. You take an asphalt shingle that might originally, if it was a 3-tab shingle, it might have come down to look something like that, and you cut those tabs right off of it. So you've got the upper half of the shingle that you mount on the roof first. And that gives the roof a nice consistent thickness, so that it's at least 2 layers worth of material thick all the way through the roof. It also makes sure that when we're looking down in between all these cutouts joints in between the shingles, we don't just see the eaves protection and we don't just see the bare wood of the roof. So we've got that starter strip there to prevent that from happening. And the starter strip also has the benefit of having the self-sealing strips, those lines, dashed lines of asphalt that help stick row 1 down to the roof deck. I like to think about it as the starter strip as being row 0. So row 0 has these asphalt tabs. Row 1 sticks to the asphalt tabs on row 0. Row 2 sticks to the asphalt tabs on row 1, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that provides some wind resistance, helps to hold the roof all together. So we put down the starter strip, and very often, again, the lazy way is to take the shingle and just turn it upside down and point it going up the roof, which is not as good because those dashed lines of asphalt you can see there are in the wrong place. If you do that, it's not going to hold down row 1 because those dashed lines of asphalt are now going to be halfway up that shingle. So what you're supposed to do then is put down a layer of mastic or roofing cement underneath all the tabs on row 1, which quite frankly, I don't think I have ever seen in my entire life. It's possible, but I don't think so. Life has got a lot simpler recently though, because manufacturers actually will now sell you starter strips, and they come in a bundle just like shingles do, or they come in a roll. They've got the self-sealing strips all in the right place. So a lot easier to install, and I assume it costs more than asphalt shingles themselves. So once again, there's the roofing companies doing something to give themselves some extra profit. Not that I'm against extra profit, but there you go. So then we're going to put down row 1, we're going to put down row 2, row 3, row 4, and the nuances that we're going to talk about in a little more detail, because these are some of the things that we can actually see. Now, the way we've got these 3-tab shingles installed, typically you're going to have, if the roof is not too steep, we're going to have 4 fasteners, 4 nails per shingle. If it's a real steep roof or a high wind area, we may have to have 6 nails in the pattern you can see down at the bottom of the slide right here. So it's going to hold down things even more. Now, the placement of these nails is actually pretty important, because if I back up here just a little bit, you can see there is an area where we've got row 1 going right along here, and row 2 overlaps row 1, but there's a little bit of an area where row 3 overlaps the middle of row 2 and the top of row 1. So in that area, which is the area you can see identified on this picture as the headlap, in that area, the shingle roof is actually 3 shingles thick. Now you can see this illustration is correct in that nail right in the middle of the picture that I'm just highlighting in yellow right there, that nail right there, where it goes through the shingle, is actually going through the middle of the shingle in row 3, and it's going through the top of the shingle in row 2. And so each shingle, even though we put 4 nails into each shingle, because those nails should be hitting the shingle in the row underneath it, that means we actually have 8 nails holding down each shingle. The 4 nails you put in one shingle and the 4 nails from the row up above. If you get those nails too high, even by an inch, if you get those nails too high, you've now cut down by half the number of nails holding each shingle down. So you end up with the same number of nails on the roof, but each nail is going through one shingle rather than going through 2 shingles. So it's pretty important for this to be in the right place. And a lot of people would use the self-sealing strip as being the nailing guide for where the nails were supposed to go, which was actually wrong. The important part is just to make sure that that nail gets into that headlap area. And when you consider that if we're looking at a shingle like this, pretty typical or conventional 3-tab shingle, that typically is going to have about 5 inches of the tab exposed. So this area from here down to here is going to be about 5 inches, which means there's going to be about 5 inches underneath the next row and the top 2 inches, because these things are about a foot tall, the top 2 inches is that headlap area that's going to be underneath the row 2 above. So if this is the shingles in row 1, this is row 1, row 2, and the very top, tough to write in a highlighter, sorry, you get the idea, row 3. So that's where the headlap area is. So we need to get the nail in that area. So you can see it kind of identified in this illustration as well. 1, 2, 3, oops, and 4 nails there. And that's roughly the right position to make sure that we're actually getting 8 nails worth of securement in every single asphalt shingle. Now, in terms of actually placing the shingles, once again, life used to be easier when we had these 3-tab shingles. Because what I've done on this particular shingle is I've placed a couple of red marks. I've got 4 red marks on this shingle. And if you look at a traditional 3-tab shingle, those marks are actually little cutouts, little slits right at the very ends and along the top of the asphalt shingle. And if you want to make sure you're going to get the right exposure, for example, if you want to make sure you get 5 inches worth of shingle exposed, all you have to do when putting row 2 down is you grab the shingle by the ends, take your thumbs and push in on the shingle just above that slit, which folds it back just slightly, and then you can just slide it down onto the shingle in the row below, and it will just support itself in exactly the right place. And the cuts along the top are used for left to right alignment. So those are about 6 inches in from the ends of the shingles. So it used to be very easy to align these shingles, both left to right and getting about a 1/2 tab stagger, which we're going to talk about again, and to get the right exposure up and down. 3-tab shingles, easy to do. Now you don't get these slots. I haven't seen any of these slots on any of the laminated shingles in particular, the architectural style shingles, just because it's a very thick shingle in a lot of places. And so it's tough to get those cutouts in place, and tough, even if they were there, I suppose, to actually push them in with your thumbs and get them to work. But like I say, we'll show you how that works. With laminated type shingles, architectural style shingles, there's a couple of different ways to manufacture them, but this slide and the next slide show you kind of the typical way of doing it. But first, once again, on a normal slope, we may need 4 nails per shingle, again, spaced out fairly evenly, as you can see in the top picture, or along the bottom if we had a steep slope or high wind area, we could put down 6 nails. But keep in mind, we're also putting these into that same headlap area. So imagine if you have 6 nails being needed for a high wind area, that actually represents 12 nails holding each one down, because they're also catching the nails from the row up above. Now there's an extra reason why it's important to make sure you get the nails in the right position when we're looking at a laminated shingle. You can see in this picture here, for example, this is a laminated shingle with some nails, and some of them are in the right place. I'm just gonna, pardon me a second, I'm just gonna change the color of my ink. There we go. So we can see some nails up here, and different manufacturers have different ways of indicating where you're supposed to nail your shingles. In this case, this manufacturer says you have to get it right in between the 2 dashed lines of asphalt. So this guy right up top here is properly placed, as is this guy over here, but that guy's a little bit too low. Anyway, because, anyway, we'll talk more about that in just a second. But one of the critical things that's important is getting the right exposure on the roof. And shingles may be, depending on whether they're imperial size or metric size, that exposure may be 5 inches, it may be 5 5/8 inches. It can vary. But rather than measure things, it's very simple to tell whether these are installed properly, because basically the bottom edge of your laminated shingle should be lining up with the top of all of these cutouts. And here you can see it's just too high. So they got the exposure wrong. Or in this case, it's too low. It's a little more difficult to tell too low, but if you were to look just up underneath the area where the finger is right there, you would see that the cutout of the shingle in this row right here is a little bit too high up right there. Now, having the exposure too small like this is not as big a problem as having it too large, because here there's less coverage. And in fact, you can see if I took this top row of shingles and if I have it too high up there, that means I could have the nail in the right place, but the nail, if it was any higher, it would be above this line over on the top right here. Now you can see where it is. The nail is catching both rows of shingles. But if it was any higher, or if the nail was higher, we're not getting the right securement to the roof. So again, that nail has to be in the right place, both to catch this row and the row below. Here's something else that's real important. You can see that the way we put these laminated shingles together, and this is a very common way of doing it, is that they are two pieces of shingle laminated together. And the very dark area here, that represents the top layer. So the top layer, you can see, goes all the way up to the top of the shingle, and it's got the cutouts in it. But the layer underneath, which is the brown, the lighter brown layer right here, it does not go all the way up to the top of the shingle. It only goes up to the top of the headlap. And so this area here, that headlap, I mean, the picture shows it being double thickness only in that area. It's actually double thickness right there. But keep in mind, the area where we're supposed to nail has to catch this double layer, because this bottom piece and the top piece they're just stuck together with adhesive. And in the long run, they'll just fall apart. You have to nail them together exactly as shown. And a very common defect we will see is that if we nail it up top above that double thickness layer, this bottom piece is just going to slide right out as the years go by. And I've got a couple of slides of that coming up. But if you ever see these bottom pieces sliding out, you know why. They just nailed it too high on the shingle, which again is a very common thing to do. Tough to see in the context of a home inspection, admittedly, but you may see the result of it on a home inspection. And again, here's something you won't see at a home inspection itself, but the manufacturer in this case wanted the nails to go somewhere along there. And in fact, most of those nails are either well above or well below that. So the nails up top here, they're not even going to catch this underlying piece right here, and it may eventually slide out. And when it starts to slide out, this is what you're going to see. The nails on this roof were just put on too high, and you can see the pieces just hanging out there. And that is the result of the nails being too high. And again, we don't have to diagnose that in the context of a home inspection, but it's useful to know why that's happening if you do see it. And if they've nailed the shingles too high in this area, what are the odds they've nailed the shingles too high pretty much on all of the shingles? But I'd be recommending that they have a roofer come out and do further evaluation to find out what repairs can be done. Although the roofer's probably going to say reshingle the roof, let's face it. One of the other things that I'm seeing done a little differently on the new laminated style shingles, which you're not supposed to do, is I'm seeing them leaving out the starter strip. These are some laminated shingles, and they have got a starter strip going up the side of the roof, up the rake of the roof, but they didn't put a starter strip along the bottom. Well, not entirely. They did put a little bit of starter strip in. They basically took one shingle tab and they put it underneath just where the joints are in between adjacent shingles in row 1. So it's not a continuous starter strip. It's wrong. You're not supposed to do that. I've checked a whole bunch of manufacturers. As a matter of fact, these are ICO Cambridge shingles, and I contacted the manufacturer and they said, yep, no, we want a full starter strip. They do not accept this as an alternative. And again, that's something you can see, certainly when we're inspecting asphalt shingles. Do lift up the first row. Don't lift it up too high. We don't want to break shingles. It's usually good. We're usually going to have a starter strip on 3-tab shingles because you need one because there's joints every foot. And so they will put that continuous starter strip in. But with these laminated shingles, these ones, as it happens, these are metric sized, and therefore there's only a joint every meter, every 39 inches. And so they just put a single tab every 39 inches. It's wrong. It was installed improperly. And again, I'd consult a roofer to determine what repairs are necessary to prevent water leakage. So let's get into more of this shingle staggering. And really what we're talking about is staggering of butt joints. And I really wanted to call the presentation staggering butt joints because each of those words individually is funny, and you put them all together, I mean, that's a laugh riot. Anyway, but this is what we're talking about when we're talking about staggering, is how much we're offsetting the butt joints in between each of the shingles as we go up the roof row to row. So this is a very common method of installing, maybe even the most common method of installing asphalt shingles. And we're starting off with just with 3-tab shingles. This is called racking. And with racking, you take row 1 and you put that shingle down, and then you put row 2 down, 6 inches to the left or right, whatever. And then row 3, you put it right where row 1 was, and row 4 goes where row 2 was. And so rows 1, 3, 5, and 7 are all the same alignment vertically, and rows 2, 4, 6, and 8 are all the same alignment vertically. It's easy to do. You can just sit in one place on the roof and just take shingles and you just put them on the roof just like that. It doesn't require a lot of moving around. It does make for a weaker roof, however, and I'm going to show you that how that becomes a problem in a little bit. Now, with racking of shingles, you're definitely going to get the shingle joints, the stagger, being 6 inches per row, and 6 inches is pretty decent. 6 inches is acceptable. I will tell you that most manufacturers of 3-tab shingles do not specify staggering as their preferred method of installation. Some of them will accept it and some won't. It's not our job to know which will and which won't, but generally speaking, putting shingles up the racking method, like this guy is doing right here, is, I would say, generally the least preferred but an acceptable method of putting shingles on. As they age, it's going to cause some problems with the roof. I'm going to show you what those look like. But one of the biggest issues, and one of the biggest reasons why manufacturers don't like racking of shingles, as you can see right here, is that in order for you to get this nail in, that nail right there, if you're working from left to right, the very left-hand nail and every other row, what you have to do is when you slide this shingle in right there, you got to get that nail in, which either means you got to bend that shingle up like the guy is doing there, and you risk damaging the shingles, or, as often happens, they just leave that nail out completely. So neither of those is a good scenario. And so that's the primary reason why manufacturers don't like it, but I'll show you some performance issues a little bit later on. Now, in terms of identifying where the end joints of asphalt shingles are, again, with 3-tab shingles, it's very easy because shingles, they go up, these shingles are roughly 12 inches wide. Again, depends on whether you're using imperial or metric size shingles. But the joints in between shingles are usually pretty easy to identify because the cutout actually goes up underneath the row above, whereas just the regular old cutouts, like I've got on the bottom right there, you can see that ends before it reaches the shingle up above. So down the bottom, that's just a cutout. but the 3 in the middle of the picture, those are actually the butt joints, the end joints in between the shingles. So here you can see they've got that racking pattern that we were just looking. Again, not the preferred method, but I think this roof has more serious issues. It's getting near the end of its life. Unfortunately, these are the shingles on my house, and I took this picture this morning. Now, the more preferred method of putting asphalt shingles on is the method shown right here, which is the stair-step method. And the stair-step method, I'm actually going to scroll back a second because I like this this picture a little better for describing it. Where are we at? Here we go. So we talked about row 0 being the starter strip down here. So what we do is if we're installing shingles, we put that shingle on there because that's a 3-tab shingle, 1, 2, 3, then another one, 1, 2, 3, and we continue across the roof like that. That's great. On the second row, what we do is we cut off half a tab. So we cut off about 6 inches, and we have half, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And then on the third row, we cut off 1 tab, and we got 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. And again, you can see that each of the joints is going to be about 6 inches away from the row below it. That's fine. Row 4, we cut off 1.5 tabs. Row 5, we cut off 2 tabs. Row 6, we cut off 2.5 tabs. Row 7, we cut off all 3 tabs. We just take 1 shingle and toss it off the roof. Obviously, row 7, we start off exactly the same as row 1 does. And so that's the stair-step method. And this is generally, like I say, the preferred method of doing things. There we go. And you end up with the joints being, again, 6 inches apart every time. The cutouts align every other row of shingles, just like they do with the racking. And the butt joints, they align only once every 7 rows. Row 1 and 7 will line up. And again, this is the preferred method. There are some other methods that are a little bit trickier that I frankly don't see a lot of benefit to. There is a school of thought that says a 4-inch offset means that 2 courses, we have 1, 2, you've got 2 rows or 2 courses of shingles in between the butt joints. It just gives a different look to the shingles. I think I have seen that maybe twice in my life. Or another is the 5-inch offset. And in this case, the butt joints align every 8th course. But frankly, you have to measure in order to install the roof this way. And there's not a lot of point in doing a lot of measurement. If you've got those on 3-tab shingles, you've got those cutouts to help you give you the automatic 6-inch alignment. Cut off half a tab, cut off 1 tab. It's just a lot easier. So these 4 and these 5-inch offsets are not very common, but 4-inch would be the minimum offset that any manufacturer would consider acceptable. They much prefer the 6-inch offset. Actually, I'll point out one alternative. I don't have a picture of it here, but there is, racking. Another way of racking shingles, which can be done, again, is not very common, is rather than shifting row 2 6 inches over, sometimes what they'll do is they'll take row 2 and they'll shift it 18 inches over. And so it looks the same as this. It's just row 1 here, row 2, 18 inches over, row 3 back to row 1, and row 4 is the same as row 2. Again, not very common, but you get the butt joints really far apart. So that's going to be a pretty common pattern with 3-tab shingles. Now, with 3-tab shingles, it was easy to get the shingle stagger right, the alignment of the joints left to right as you go up the shingles. When you get to single-tab shingles, it becomes a little bit more difficult for 2 reasons. One is you don't have easy tabs to cut off. Like I can't just cut off half a tab real easy because the whole shingle is 1 tab. And we don't have those slits cut in the shingles to help us align things. So how do we do it with single tab shingles? Well, if we want to save some material and labor, this is a good way of doing it. We take row 1 and we install row 1. That's great. Then what we do is we cut off 6 inches out of row 2 and we put that one down. Then we cut out 11 inches out of row 3. And then we take that 11-inch piece and we use it for row 4. And we take the 6-inch piece and we reuse it for row 5. That's one way of doing it. We're not wasting any materials. The pieces we cut off, we can just put right back on the roof. And now we've got some of our joints are going to be 5 inches apart from row to row. Some are going to be 6 inches apart. 5 and 6 inches is good enough. Here's another version. These are the ICO Cambridge shingles I was showing you a little bit earlier. In this case, the manufacturer says we put down row 1 full shingle, row 2 we cut off 10 inches, row 3 we cut off 20 inches, row 4 we cut off 30 inches, and so now we're going to have the joints 10 inches apart, and that's going to work. Basically, ICO says, as it says just down here, any other offset between, according to ICO, 6 to 10 inches may be used. So in their case, 6 inches is their recommended minimum. And it's easy to see when you're actually installing the shingles. And I do just want to point out the proper place to nail these shingles is going to be somewhere at right about this height, because that's going to catch the double layer right there, as well as catching the shingle down below it. This is easy to see when you're installing shingles, but as home inspectors, we're not installing shingles. What we want to do is we want to have a look at that stagger and basically make sure that it's 4 inches or greater. And I know ICO just said they want it to be 6 inches. Some manufacturers say 4. I don't want to find out every manufacturer's recommendations and try to figure out what kind of shingles these are. So I just go with basically the industry standard minimum, which is 4 inches. But here's the trick. When we're looking at these types of shingles, these single tab laminated architectural style shingles, it can be very difficult to see where the joints are. Like I'm just looking at this, I can't really tell. Is there a 6-inch offset, 4-inch offset, 18 inches, 10 inches? I really don't know. You have to get in real close and personal in order to figure out where the joints are. And here what I did is I just marked the butt joints, and you can see they go up in a racking style. I'm just taking a couple of pieces of paper and put them at each of the joints, and each of those was at least 6 inches apart. So better than my 4-inch minimum, and so that was good enough for me. But like I say, you have to get real up close and personal. Here, for example, that is one shingle, that is another shingle, that is actually the joint between the two. And I find like sometimes I have to like get really, really close to be able to figure out where the shingles join together. Here, for example, right at the left side of my tape measure, I've got the ends of this shingle. So that's shingle 1, that's shingle 2, and I've got shingle 3 and shingle 4, and that is a joint, and that is a joint, so we do have about 7 inches in between those, and that's fine. And a word about measuring things. I am not a big measurer of things. I've got several pictures you're going to see in the next couple of slides, pardon me, that have tape measures in them. But I am not a proponent of finding defects by measuring for them. I may use a tape measure to confirm it. So if I look at something and I go, you know, something just by my eye, that seems like it's less than 4 inches, I may get out my tape measure to say, measure it and say, oh, yes, it is. Or I may get out my tape measure to give me a reference for when I take a picture of it. But I'm not just taking my tape measure and applying it to all sorts of different things in the house, like joists and window sills and whatever it happens to be. I'm not measuring heights, I'm not measuring slopes. unless it looks like there's a problem with them. So I do just want to point that out. In this case, we've got 7 inches, but again, it can be real tough to see where the joints are. Here, I've got my tape measure just pointing at where one of the joints are, and on this next slide, I've just highlighted the area where the joints are. And if we go back and forth, you can see it's pretty subtle as to where they are. Like once we start getting 1, 2, 3, 4 rows away, I'm standing right at the edge of this roof. And on that 4th row, it's tough to see. And it is worth having a close look for. And I wouldn't necessarily go looking over the entire roof. At the very least, the shingles at the edge, if they've got it right the first 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, chances are pretty good they've got the right stagger over the rest of the roof. And in this picture, actually, is interesting because I didn't look at the upper row. This is the row just higher up from the one we were looking at. Pardon me. And it was the shingle stagger was actually reduced, but again, in this picture, it's tough to tell. You have to get up close and personal. So with architectural style shingles, definitely get up and have a close look for it. Here you can see an example where the shingle stagger in between adjacent rows, from the one way down the bottom here, we've got one joint and another joint and another joint. So row 2, row 3, row 1 down here. Even the joint between row 1 and row 2, the stagger is only about 3 inches. And we've got about 1.5 inches of spacing in between the joints in row 2 and row 3. That's just not enough. We're going to talk about the implications coming up. Here's another example, again, only about 1.5 inches of stagger in between those butt joints. It's a little easier to see it in this case just because this shingle right down here isn't vertically aligned very well with the shingle beside it. So there's a little better reference point. But in a lot of cases, if they've got the exposure correct, it can be very difficult to see where the stagger is. Now, what I've got on screen right here is what's often called a California style valley flashing. And these can be open or they can be closed cut valleys. And this is one of the reasons why you will sometimes get stagger done incorrectly. Here's what I mean. California style valley means we have this side of the roof is shingled first, and those shingles come over to this point here. That's all good. Then what we do is we take shingles and we run them vertically up the valley. And then we take the shingles on the other side and we start putting the shingles down row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, etc. And the tendency is that when those shingles go on the right-hand side, we usually start with a full shingle. And that means that the ends of the shingle in row 1 may be less than 4 inches from the shingle on the end of row 2 and the end of row 3 and the end of row 4. Now, that's not the worst thing in the world because there are extra layers of shingle underneath here. Here's the problem though. If we start off row 1 with a full shingle, that means the other end of that shingle is going to be right there. And if we also start row 2 with a full shingle, the end is going to be there. And if we start row 3 with a full shingle, it's going to be there, etc., etc. So the problem is not so much in the valley, but the problem is when you're installing a California style valley, very often all the other joints are staggered improperly. The proper way of doing this with a California valley is if you start row 1 with a full shingle, you do exactly as you would do if you were at the edge of the roof. You start with, cut 10 inches off row 2, cut 20 inches off of row 3. Start row 4 with a full shingle, and then you get the proper stagger back. But like I say, the tendency is to start each of these rows with a full shingle. So when you see a California style valley, especially with architectural style shingles, go looking for improper stagger over on this portion of the roof. Or sometimes if it's an open, you may have a metal valley and shingles run vertically up either side of that valley, again, California style, then you would have to check both sides to see if they got the shingle stagger correct. And that's an example of a California style valley. It's a little difficult to see, but that is one shingle running vertically up there, another shingle running vertically up there, and everything goes away from it. And here we've got about 4 inches, so it's probably not bad. The thing is, you can imagine as the slope changes, as the slope gets steeper, each of those adjacent rows of shingles are going to get closer and closer together with respect to the joints on them. So keep that in mind with California style. So what are the implications? Like, so what? Well, in some cases, it can result in an aesthetic concern, especially when you're talking about 3-tab shingles. Improper stagger of the shingles can just, I mean, the shingle roof typically looks kind of like a brick wall, right? Chunk, 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 chunk. It's got a very even appearance, and if you have improper stagger, it can give it a very uneven appearance. You can also get a shortened life expectancy out of the roof, if not the shingles themselves. We may even, especially if it's a nailing issue, we may get a loss of shingles, and leakage can be a concern as well. Here, for example, is a 3-tab shingle roof, and even from this angle, you can see where the butt joints are. There's a butt joint, there's one, there's one, there's one, and there's one. And how do I know that? That is because as the roofs age, especially if they don't have very good ventilation, air tends to leak out of the roof system itself. And what we can see here, right in that area is actually where air has been leaking out from in between these 2 shingles. So air leaks out of that butt joint and it lifts up the shingle up above it. And this, I mean, it takes a long time for that to happen, but now we've got a whole bunch of lifting shingles all lined up together. And especially in a wind-driven rain, or if there is snow on the roof, that's going to be an area that's vulnerable to leakage. If we had these closer together, these are 6 inches, but if we had them closer together, if they were only 2 or 3 inches apart, those openings are going to be a very significant opening for water to penetrate. Poor staggering and also even just racking can show up as an aesthetic concern. This isn't really a functional problem, so I wouldn't be reporting it, but just understand that it can end up being an aesthetic concern. You can see all the different bundles of shingles that did not quite match. And especially when you're racking shingles like this, it's best to grab shingles from different bundles and mix and match rather than installing one package at a time. Here's a roof which are architectural style shingles, and we've got again, they did go up on a diagonal, but the joints where the adjacent shingles meet each other are roughly where I'm showing you right there. There's another one there. And let's see, and there, I think. And several of these, I mean, are obviously closer than 4 inches. And in this case, the roof was leaking, and it wouldn't leak during a rain, but it would leak when there was snow on the roof. But that's the big issue. It's either roofs, areas where you get either a lot of snow or a lot of wind-driven rain. That's where shingle stagger tends to show its weaknesses even more. But leakage is a significant concern. So just to finish off, you know, in terms of reporting, this is my own twist on what it is that we have to report. It's my 4 whats. What is it? What's wrong? So what? What now? Right? And so here's an example of just reporting on, in this case, the shingle stagger is fine, so the picture doesn't mean much, but I just threw in a picture for the sake of it. But this is a comment that I wrote talking about improper staggering of asphalt shingles. I've actually got two different flavors of this. This one is, in some locations, the gaps between adjacent asphalt shingles are too closely aligned in adjacent rows. Further evaluation by a licensed roofing contractor is required to determine what repairs, if any, are required to prevent water leakage and related damage to structure and finishes. What is it? Asphalt shingles. What's wrong? The gaps are too close. So what? Water damage. What now? Further evaluation. And by the way, very important, not just further evaluation to, like, you don't just need further evaluation. For what's the goal of further evaluation? To figure out if there's a problem? No, I know there's a problem. Further evaluation is required to figure out what needs to be done about it, because I'm not coming up with the repair for this. And maybe the roofer says, you know something, there's not much you can do about it, it's just bad. Or the roofer may say, oh, I've got a way of fixing this. I've got like magical sauce. I don't know what they're going to put on there. Or what they're more likely to say is to reduce the risk of this roof leaking, we really need to reshingle it because it was done improperly. And they're probably right. The other flavor of the statements I've got is, rather than just say in some locations, I would say in many locations, the gaps are too closely aligned. So I just picked the one that is appropriate. But just remember all the different elements. What is it? What's wrong? So what? What now? That's our reporting. And anyway, that flew by pretty quickly. Well, for me, anyway. I don't know about for you, but that brings me to the end of talking about butt joint stagger, which I just really wanted to say again. Ask Kimberly if we had any questions or shared experiences coming through.
Fantastic. Well, I do have some great questions that have come in, and everyone else, please feel free to add more questions now as we get into the Q&A. So first question I've got here, Graham, is would a metal roof be made of material, would metal roofs be made of other materials than steel?
Yes, they can be steel, they can be aluminum, they can be turned, they can be lead, they could be copper. Short answer is yes. And
Okay.
turned, by the way, is it's not really an alloy, but it's lead coated steel, I think. Yeah. Oh, and lead too. But in terms of larger metal roofs, I mean, steel is going to be real common. Copper is going to be very easy to tell just because it's either copper colored or copper oxide colored. If you're, and again, there are some lead. Lead is usually going to be smaller roofs. But if you want to know if it's steel for sure, grab your magnet and throw it up there.
Fantastic.
Oh, actually, let me add one more thing to that. If you have the option of, if you look at a metal roof, I always like calling it a metal roof. The more specific you are about something, the more likely you are to be wrong about it. So metal is good enough for me, metal should be good enough for you. And that's just what I call it.
Fabulous. My next one for you, Graham. Are any visual nails exposed okay on the ridge cap?
No. Are they going to be a problem? Realistically, on the ridge, no, they're not going to be a problem because you have to really get a direct hit and the world has to go really sideways for that to be a problem. But technically, no, all exposed nails, and there will be some on the ridge cap. There will typically be 4. They should have sealant on them.
Great, thank you. Next one I've got is any noted issues on roofs being installed in the wintertime with shingles not adhering to the lower shingle due to weather not allowing the adhering to the lower shingle?
It does happen because it takes heat for the self-sealing strips to activate. There's not too much you can do about it. You can add roofing cement or roofing mastic underneath the first row to supplement those self-healing strips. But honestly, I mean, it's more likely to happen on the first row. It can happen anywhere else. Once you get into the heat of the summer, the problem goes away, but it's the risk of winter construction, and it's not a big enough risk to hold off constructing a house.
Okay, great. The next one I've got is sort of a half comment, half question. So it really revolves around the ability to determine from the inspection that it is important when you use an air nailer for the is set to be the correct pressure. So this has happened to one of our inspectors. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, it's I mean, because you've either got the nails going in too deep or not going in deep enough. It's easier to tell that they're not going in deep enough because when they sit proud, it tends to punch through the shingle in the row above. In my experience, the issue is more that the pressure is just cranked right up and it just blasts right through the shingle, and the shingle is not being held in place by a nail that blasts through it. You know something? It's just a limitation of the inspection. It would be, I'd like to say we can lift up, even in a couple of areas, and I'm not going to say this, by the way, but we could, try lifting up some shingle tabs in a couple of locations. Maybe we could check the nails, make sure each of the shingles is held down by 4 nails, make sure they're in the right place, make sure they're not blasted through or sitting proud or on an angle. But having had to lift a bunch of shingles during my career, it's tough to do, and they often break. It's honestly, it's just not practical. This is one of those defects that if one came across my desk, and one of the things that I do as part of my own business is I do litigation support. I deal with lawsuits relating to home inspections. If anybody ever brought me anything that said, hey, this inspector didn't determine that the nails were overdriven, underdriven, improperly installed, improperly located, I would just say, you got nothing. Like it's way outside the scope of a home inspection. That's destructive testing right there.
Thank you. The next one we've got is, how many layers are acceptable?
2. Generally speaking, I mean, building codes will say you can put 2 layers on. So 1 layer plus another one on top. The second layer will not last as long as the first layer because it's not going to be lying down as flat. Again, as a practical matter, you may end up having to strip anyway, depending on what type of shingles that you're putting on. So for example, if you have a roof with a 3-tab shingle and it's got 5 inches of exposure, and you're going to put on top of it laminated shingles with a 5 5/8 inch exposure, those laminated shingles are taller, and your second row, like the top of each row of shingles, like row 1 has to line up with the top of row 1 on the original roof, and the top of row 2 has to line up with the top of row 2. If you're putting different size shingles on, you just can't do it. Well, literally you can, but you shouldn't do it. So if the shingles are the same size, the same dimensions, the answer is 2, and that really comes down to being for 2 reasons. One is roofs are designed for that kind of load, and the second is by the time you start getting 3 layers of shingles down, especially if you're talking about 3 layers of laminated shingles, like if you're nailing down through 1.5 inches worth of asphalt shingle material, you're just nailing shingles to shingles. You're not hitting any wood.
Great, thank you. The next one I've got is, can a drip edge be installed after the shingles are installed? I see a lot of roofs that don't have a drip edge.
Yes, I've done it. The slightly more complicated question is, what is a drip edge for? And it depends on where you are. This is one of these building components that depending on where you, like collar ties, for example. In Canada, collar ties are installed for completely different reasons and completely opposite loading from how they're installed in the US. But drip edge, in some cases, it's designed to protect the fascia from the water running down off of the roof. And in that case, the drip edge should be installed underneath the eaves protection. But in a lot of places in the south, they want the drip edge installed over the eaves protection because we're trying to stop wind-driven rain from getting up underneath the layers of the roof. If it has to go under the eaves protection, and if you have a peel and stick membrane on the roof, in that case, you can't get the drip edge underneath the peel and stick membrane. So no, there's not really too much you can do. But if it's just felt paper or mineral mineral and non-mineral surface roofing, yes, you can install it after the fact, assuming everything else, there's nothing else getting in your way, like the aluminum on the fascia sitting too proud, things like that. So you may be able to, I would say in most cases you can, yes.
Okay, we are just at the 4:30 mark, but I do have a few more questions, so I'm going to try and squeeze them in if I could. So Graham, the next one is, what is the most common defect that causes roofs to leak? The most common.
Well, I mean, I'd point to anything around flashings more so than the actual installation of shingles themselves. I'm going to say flashing and just improperly done flashings, the lack of proper counter flashings, and one of the other, actually, what I'd say more design than installation of shingles is just a lot of heavy water traffic in certain areas of the roof, either because of converging valleys or changes in slope and changes in pitch that wear certain areas of the roof out more quickly. Or again, if you've got high water traffic and if you've got the inadequate coverage, so rather than 5 inches being exposed, I've got like 6 or 7 inches exposed, and the joints are aligned too closely together, and a whole bunch of water traffic in one area, or slow water traffic because of a low slope. Those are those things I really watch out for, and that's my cheating away of somebody asking me for the #1 reason, and I give 5.
I love it. My next one is, I've seen asphalt shingles over wood. Is this okay? And does the 2-layer rule still apply in this situation?
Yes, it's okay. I've seen it. I have seen 3 layers of asphalt over 1 layer of wood. It is not a preferred practice, no. One of the challenges you sometimes run into just from a budgetary point of view is if I have a house with a wood shingle roof, the wood, the sheathing underneath those wood shingles may not be suitable for putting asphalt shingles on, because these days most asphalt shingle manufacturers say they want their shingles on like board, not boards, plywood and OSB. And if I had wood shingles on top of spaced lumber sheathing, now I'm going to strip off the shingles, and I'm going to put down plywood over top of that skipped sheathing. Man, that's a really expensive thing to do, in which case your cheaper alternative is not strip the shingles and put it down. So it's permitted. It's not good practice, but the 1 layer of wood plus 1 layer of asphalt, generally I would say is acceptable, but not the preferred way of going.
Okay, and the questions keep on coming, Graham. And we've got a really engaged audience here. Where do you look to make sure they are the same size shingles on a multi-layer roof?
At the rake, at the edge, so the angled edge going up, you can see how tall the shingles are right there. So yeah, I don't have a I actually have a bunch of pictures of that. But yeah, if you get to the roof, like the edge of the gable, look at the roof right there, the angled edge going up, you can see it there.
Okay, our next one, Graham. How much overhang from the edge is appropriate? Sometimes I see shingles that seem excessively hanging over the edge.
Yeah, I see. I mean, typically you want no more than 1.5 inches. And different manufacturers say different things ranging from 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And I see a lot shorter as well. But yeah, when I see like half the tab hanging down into the gutter or covering the gutters, it's too much. Usually it's not a big deal if somebody had to correct it because you can just trim them off. Easier to trim something off than to cut. But more than 1.5 inches has always felt excessive to me.
Okay, and our next one, Graham. What is better, OSB sheathing or plywood? Can OSB sheathing be visible under the eaves?
Yes. Is it, I mean, I know where you're going with it. You're right. OSB needs to be protected, but guess what? You know that plastic plumbing pipe in your house, you know that it's not allowed to be exposed to the sun. Well, guess what we see sticking up above the roof on every single house? Like all those exposed plumbing stacks are technically not rated for sun exposure. But yeah, the OSB at the bottom edge, yeah, technically should be protected, but realistically it isn't. And as a practical matter, it's going to perform.
And Graham, our next, as I understand it, manufactured homes should only have one layer of roofing installed. Is that correct?
That would depend on the manufacturer. And I don't know as much about manufactured homes, but I would absolutely buy that. I can believe that some manufactured home manufacturers would only want one. They're a little more, because they're manufactured, they tend to push the limits more on how the structure is designed. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
On ridge venting, what is the typical amount of overhang past the venting screen?
Pretty much thought it's going to be less than 1.5 inches anyway. I mean, as long as it covers the ridge venting material, and there's a lot of different styles of them. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen one that I've considered excessive. But if it were enough that I just have to make a judgment call on it rather than a measurement. But if it looks like it was likely as it aged, if it was going to fold down and eventually go down over the venting material, I'd call that out. Again, a simple thing to correct if it ever became a problem, or if I saw it actually blocking the venting material. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen one where it's a problem, which isn't to say it can't be.
What is preferred sheathing, OSB or plywood?
Plywood, I mean, I will say plywood, but not by enough that it would override any budgetary concerns in my mind. In the same sense that's what's stronger, a masonry wall or a wood frame wall? Well, a masonry wall is, but you know what? Wood frame wall is strong enough.
And where is ridge venting used? I've never seen it.
Well, in some areas, all you see is ridge venting. It tends to be further south, although that's not an absolute statement. Here, for example, in the Toronto area, I would say I see 1 in 100 houses with ridge venting, whereas I know lots of our franchisees, you know, all they ever see is ridge venting. It can be very regional.
Okay. So with that, I had a couple of questions about the recording of this session. So everyone, this session will be recorded. We'll be posting the recording in Mailbox. It'll also sit always in the in case you missed it area of mailbox under the webinar recording. So I think a lot of people here, Graham, really want to review this and go over it again, or perhaps share with their team, which is fantastic. And one more thing, just before I pass it over to you, Chuck, we had a couple of suggestions that came into the questions area. A suggestion on perhaps a future session on flashing, and a suggestion on a future session perhaps on clay shingles. So, you know, would we consider doing a session that was really much on clay tile roofs and so on? So, so that is a bit of feedback. So we'll certainly look into that. And then Chuck, I'll throw it over to you to take us out in our last moments.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for those suggestions and other topics. If you have some ideas for other topics, please send those along. It's our intention to keep this up, and part of the focus is to have more and smaller topics. Like, you know, even though there's an enormous amount of information, it's a very focused, let's not call it small, call it a focused topic. So if you got some ideas for focused topics like that that would suit this sort of 1 hour to, you know, 1 hour, 15-minute sort of time slot, we want to do some more of those. So keep the ideas coming. So I wanted to do a little bit of a wrap up, but I was trying to sketch out what I would say, but I keep coming up with staggered butt joints. So it just keeps going downhill. So I think what I'll do is just wrap it there, and say thanks very much for the presentation. I guarantee everybody on this call has learned something. There's nobody that's walking away without something. So I really appreciate it. It was really good, really great presentation.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Graham. All right, see you later, everybody.
All right.
Take care, everyone.